614 Startups Nation, welcome to the 614 Startups Podcast. My name is Elio Harmon, your host, and I'm here with a very special guest, my man Ed Porter of Chip CRO. Ed, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, man. I love the digs here. It's the first time here.
Listen, we're growing up.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of being a startup. You have to progress, learn, and grow. And I've been fortunate to keep growing in the right way, making the show better, bringing on great guests, and exploring a lot of topics. And today is no different because we're going to talk about one of the things that I struggle with, and I hope you can add value to me and our audience. We're going to talk about revenue today, Ed.
All right.
And
Very
I understand
near and dear
that.
to me.
Yeah, I understand you're Mr. Revenue.
We'll see.
We'll
see.
We'll figure out as we go,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
All right. So before we get into revenue too deeply, a bit about your personal and professional background.
Yeah, so I'm native of Columbus for the most part. Came here when I was 5, went to school here. So I've been here most of my life, spent a little bit of time in Dayton, and then came back to Columbus. So love Columbus, love the hype it has, and I love that it's more than hype and that it's starting to get there. So Columbus native, I kind of got my start in the professional world. I was 19, I was going to college and working part-time, and I took a job as a call center rep. And it was a terrible job, but it was one of those things that I loved, and I found myself at that company for 8 years, rose up the ranks, eventually worked full-time, and by the time I was 25 years old, had over 1,000 people reporting to me over a couple locations. So it was very much sink or swim for me, and that's where I learned a lot of leadership, and that's where I learned a lot about understanding the customer experience, and that really helped shape my career. So then I left there and worked for a startup that was incubated by Tech Columbus called Call Copy. I worked with a lot of the guys at the call center company, so I got to know them. So I got a little bit of the startup world experience, and then from there started to build an inside sales team, started to learn a lot about marketing and customer service, and then joined another startup afterwards and was along the ride towards their acquisition that was Smart Harbor here in town, a part of the shipyard. And then once that company got sold, I had been doing consulting for a few years. So it was something that I learned along the way. I made a lot of mistakes and learned a lot from them and did a ton of research. And it's something now I can turn a passion into something that makes me money. And ultimately I can wake up in the morning and go sit on my deck and not have to report to an office. So I'm really happy about that.
That's nice, man.
Yeah.
I have a sucky call center job story.
Yeah.
So my sucky call center job was selling labor law compliance posters to businesses.
Nice.
Now, how many people get a phone call about their labor law posters and are excited to hear from you?
So this is where my experience with revenue will be able to tell you, flip it around a little bit to say, how many people know that they have a requirement for it? Are they prepared for it? So yeah, talk about a boring call, but if you spin that properly, that becomes a really beneficial call.
Okay, man, I feel like I need to go get my pen and my pencil because I'm about to go to a master class here on selling, all right? So that's where the bar is, master class on selling. So stick with us, listen to the whole episode. You're gonna become a pro by the end of this, all right?
There we go.
So you're a journeyman, right? And you know, it's very rare to hear those stories about, hey, the first startup I joined is a startup that made it all the way to exit. So how early were you in that company? And like you said, you made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot of lessons. What do you think it was about that company that really helped you guys get to an exit?
So for that particular, I was fortunately part of the call center company that got acquired. And then the startup I joined after that also got acquired. So in both scenarios, when I was
2-0.
Yeah, I was probably like 23 or so when the first company that got acquired, and I didn't really know much about acquisitions or what you're trying to do, and the owner sure did, and they did a great job. I'm still friends with one of the owners today, and very smart guy. So they had a different path than me, and I learned about like this acquisition, and when you become part of another company, you start learning about culture, and to me that was a little bit of a foreign concept. So fast forward to the next company that I joined, I wasn't part of the company when they got acquired, but was friends with a lot of people and still professional colleagues today of hearing their journey. And I think the exciting part for me when I was part of that startup was, much like in any, you wear a lot of different hats and you just try to figure it out. And at some point you get scrappy, and then you hit this pivot to where now you're hiring people to do some effective things. But so that was my experience. What I would say my true experience in the startup was just understanding how close I would communicate with everybody, even engineering. I know nothing about programming. I have the highest respect for those people because it's great intelligence that's needed, and I'm just not there. But I liked communicating with them, so I could hear a little bit about what their development schedules look like and how that works into product releases. Really cool stuff that I learned at that company. So while I wasn't part of that acquisition, I was getting up to that point, and my role at that time was trying to build a channel revenue program. So they were selling software direct to end users, and they wanted to start to bring in partners and figure out how were going to grow that side of it. And that was a big learning experience for me. That was a great benefit from that company, is I learned a lot about what is a channel, how to build a program, what does it mean, how is it beneficial, where's the risk, and that was the best learning from that first startup.
Yeah, and I can imagine if there are two things based on what you're saying, is that one, they were probably thinking exit from the very start. Right, so they were, like you said, you joined a group of people who knew what they were doing, and they were trying to get to an acquisition or an exit. And then number two, they had robust sales programs. They were thinking about customers, building products that customers wanted, and they knew how to sell it.
Yeah.
So the term that we're going to focus on for this conversation is revenue. So how do you define revenue? Let's start there. So we're not mixing terms here based on kind of what you're talking about.
So talking to anyone in finance, or as I've grown to know the term is finance. I still can't get myself to say it. But for that, it's revenue. It's pretty easy. It's dollars. It's money. When it comes down to, you start seeing a lot of chief revenue officer. What does that title mean? And then now we're starting to hear revenue operations and revenue organizations. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of inconsistencies. So to me, when I hear revenue organization, or if I understand what a chief revenue officer does or should do, that is the full buyer's life cycle. There needs to be a revenue organization that's combined of different entities: sales, marketing, operations, customer success or customer service, anyone that will interact or be part of the customer experience. In my opinion, there needs to be one throat to choke, and that's the chief revenue officer. If something breaks down in that buyer life cycle, that person needs to arm a team to figure it out. Where I start to see a lot of that title get misnamed is when they're just replacing VP of sales or chief sales officer with chief revenue officer, and it's not a swap. If a CRO doesn't own the marketing awareness side of a customer, the nurturing side in sales, and the onboarding side in customer success, then they can't effectively own revenue. Yes, there can be partnerships, and I absolutely agree on partnering with different departments and making sure that everyone's aligned. But that's how I define a revenue organization: is anybody that is part of the buyer life cycle, from, again, marketing to sales to customer success, and the operations teams that start to blend them all together.
Right. Okay, so we're going to dig into buyer life cycles, because I feel like that's one topic removed. So I just want to repeat something real quick. So revenue, right, is monies collected for products sold, services provided, etc. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What I feel like I'm hearing is that most people, when they're thinking early on about the product that they're creating, they're not necessarily thinking about all four phases of the buyer cycle, or as you describe it, the buy cycle. I feel like I've been guilty of putting the cart before the horse, right? I have this product. I'm not really thinking about your experience. Like, you should buy this. My product is awesome. So let's reverse engineer this and think about what we should be thinking about from the buyer's perspective. So what does that buyer cycle look like?
Yeah, so let's take an example. So Entrepreneur's Brew, coffee. Just had it and love it. So
if you're going to give me free consulting, you could do 614 startups to entrepreneur. Interchangeable, all right? Yeah, help me fix my revenue.
But think about it. At some point you had an idea, and that idea starts to take shape. So not only are you building the supply chain, you're also figuring out what's this going to look like to a customer. The packaging, you're talking about the product itself. It's coffee, so it's got to have an aroma. Obviously, it's got to taste. So you're talking about all these intricacies, and all that's really doing is you're trying to get a customer to buy a product, but you're talking about all of these things that are happening. And that, I look at that, most of that being marketing. You're looking at presentation, which is visual in the packaging, and it's in a sense of smelling. Then you get a taste. So all of that's marketing. At some point, as a customer, I'm gonna engage with marketing, and I'm gonna make a buying decision. That buying decision is gonna happen potentially through you if you're out talking about it or trying to put it in retailers. But at some point, that buying decision is gonna be made, and it's gonna come from a couple avenues. It's gonna say, what does the web presence look like? How are their customer reviews? Do I know somebody that bought it and had a good experience and they're referring me? So I'm making these buying decisions. And then,
But hang on.
yeah,
Like early stage, right? So you hear like if you watch enough YouTube videos, you probably come across this theory that, hey, you need to go super lean. And typically what gets sacrificed in the lean is the buyer experience, because you're just trying to put something in front of them. It's not gonna have all those experience components. So at what stage of this buyer sophistication, let's call it, are they really making decisions about packaging? Clearly, Apple needs to think about packaging, but does a startup on day one necessarily need to think about customer experience? Are you challenging us
yes.
to think about customer experience from day one?
And here's why. There was a book that I read called Selling to the Point. The guy's name is Jeffrey Lipschitz, and I met him several years ago, liked him, bought his book, read it. And there's a point in that book that really got me thinking about this. And he starts off the book, I believe, by saying, the point of selling is buying. So if you think about this, as you're building a company or a product, yeah, you may think about ways to sell it. It's irrelevant because it doesn't matter what your initiative is. It matters what the buyer's initiative is. You can never sell somebody. Like, they have to commit to buying. So I would say what I'm very passionate about is, and I'm doing this with clients, I'm doing with my own startup that we're working on now, is we're focusing on who is the buyer, what do they want, which they may not know what they want. So then we have to go down paths of understanding. You could go down problem identification and pain point, but ultimately all of this has to come around to making a unique or differentiated or better experience in order to get somebody to buy. So again, the point of selling is buying. If that gets ingrained into you, that will shift everything you do in a company, from your engineering teams, from your finance teams, from customer success, marketing, sales. Everything that they do has to stem from, are we solving a problem? Is it big enough that they want to buy our product or service to solve it? And then once they've made that buying decision, how do I get them to keep buying?
Let me challenge you on that,
Yes.
because there is such thing as obsessing about things that don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like trying to get the website designed so
Yes.
perfect, like the marketing is great, but the customer doesn't want to use it. How do you talk to people about balancing the two? Because I mean, entrepreneurs brew, you get it in the mail. We want it to be a little bit more impactful than where it needs to be, but we're spending money on some other things. Mm-hmm. And I want to cross the finish line with you here that says, hey, think about customer experience. I think you guys can up your game here, but what is that tinkering on the edges, and what is that boom? Like, if you made this change, it's going to be impactful. How does a founder early on start to make those decisions about the things that matter?
You brought up a website, which is something I am maniacal about, is that too much thought and money and time is put into it. Mm-hmm. Not to say that it needs to be good, but there's a difference between doable and unreal. And you got to look at the stage of your company. So you could spend tons of calories overthinking, over-engineering, over-analyzing, and overpaying for a marketing website. Quite frankly, all you need is some of the basics to start off. And I'll tell you that I don't know how much time you spent on the marketing website and the buying site, but mm-hmm. It was a pretty seamless experience. And I'm not a tech savvy person. I get technology, but I was able to review the products, easily filter them, add some quantities, go check out and go. So it was easy. Is it full of bells and whistles? No. And I would say no one cares, quite frankly. So it's kind of a long-winded way to get back to your question of, as a startup, and I would even say as any company, is you always have to evaluate how much time and money is invested versus what's the output. Yes, we can nitpick every little thing, and I can pay editors to go edit copy, and I can go get marketing designers to go like proof everything. But ultimately, can I get a product in front of somebody where I may care if the color palette doesn't quite work, but a buyer isn't? They may if there's a disability in vision impairment, so I get that.
Yeah.
But generally, they may say, this green, I don't like this shade of green. But if that's not going to cause them not to buy, then who cares?
All right, so if the problem is pressing enough, the forgiveness threshold is higher.
Much higher.
So getting them to at least buy when the problem is like you don't have to sell a meal to a hungry person. The problem is pressing. They're not worried so much about the wrapper or all of that. The problem is pressing. I need to solve my problem. There's forgiveness there. So number one, for revenue, solve a pressing problem. So speaking of Entrepreneurs Brew, entrepreneurs need coffee to keep them going, to offer coffee. Step one.
Yeah.
Buying the coffee process, easy, intuitive. That gives them an impression of the brand. Probably not going to leave things in the cart, right? They're going to follow through all the way to checkout. I think what we're also talking about is that phase 2 experience. Now that I've bought, right? What is my experience now? Because that's really going to drive lifetime value. Is that what you're talking about?
So this is where I'm going to take it back to what you said earlier, is when you focus on the buyer's experience, the customer experience, there's milestones there that you have to achieve. The first is you got to get somebody to know who the heck you are. So you need to figure out, how am I going to get Entrepreneur's brand out to everybody in the world? That's step one. Step two is, now that they know who I am, how do I get them to make a purchase? Step three is, they've made a purchase. How do I get them to buy more? And that could be more of the same item, or it could be wider, different items. So each of these milestones are important. So when you talk about customer experience or buying experience, that's the key, is at what point in that stage, which is the revenue organization, do I have a marketing problem, a sales problem, or a customer renewal, repeat purchase, retention, whatever, do I have that kind of problem? And then figuring out, how do you align that? And a great example of somebody making a first purchase is that experience is going to shape whether they buy from you again. Am I getting an email confirmation? Is it shipping out in time? Am I getting it in the mail in time? Those are some importance, and there's a range on a scale of 1 to 10, but those are part of the experience. There are plenty of times where that failed experience, it doesn't matter how the product looks or tastes, they're going to make a decision not to buy from you because of that experience. Well, that's not fair because they haven't tried the product. Well, it's the experience that's shaping us. So as I want to take this back to, again, what you're saying is, when you're focusing on, again, the point of selling is buying. So if you're focusing on the buyer and the buying experience and figuring out what is it, you've already solved the problem, or potentially they've made a decision to purchase. So now we got to deliver the experience that is desired. And that doesn't have to be like same day shipping or next day. Everyone's trying to compete with Amazon. I think that's fine as a roadmark, or as a guideline, but it's not a necessity. So unless you're competing directly with Amazon. But other than that, it's trying to get an irrelevant expectation of time. So what you said earlier about how much time do you put into these things, I wouldn't operationalize a company to try and do like same day shipping and next day delivery, because there's a tolerance for that by industry. Now, if you're selling oh crap items, like my water line just broke and I need something right away, that's a little bit different. But that's how you operationalize your company around what does the buyer expect, and then meet them where they're at. Are you going to go knocking on doors saying, here's Entrepreneurs Brew. Do you like it? Do you want us to try a sample? No, you're not going to do that in today's digital age.
So, okay, so I'm with you. I'm tracking. This is the stuff that really gets me excited and gets me engaged. So we know, okay, so marketing is at the front end, right? We need to build brand awareness. We need to build that trust. We need to get them to buy from us. Some products like coffee, e-commerce company, your marketing and sales is all web-based. You have to do both the job of, hey, building that trust immediately and then selling them, right? Making it easy to filter. Some of the things that you talked about, maybe presenting reviews from other coffee drinkers right below the coffee, number of stars, right? What are the coffee brands that people really enjoy? Maybe that might provide the social proof for somebody to make a sale. So for Entrepreneurs Brew, the entire process is web-based. They don't talk to someone, right? Let's talk about people who try to shoehorn a marketing plus sales product, meaning all we can do with marketing is get you that brand awareness and that trust and prompt them to make a phone call. You're now trying to sell a product that actually needs that personal touch. How do you help people? Because I know some of it is financial, right? We can't have salespeople selling, bags of coffee, but there are certain products that you need a salesperson. So how do you help early on startups who might be thinking, hey, we can sell this whole thing just online like Netflix does, and there's nobody that we need to talk to, versus I have a product here where I need to build out a sales team to sell?
So again, I talk about alignment and I talk about customer experience and life cycle, and I'm gonna keep talking about it because the answer is always in where is your customer? Meet the customer where they are, not where you wanna be. You may have all the desire in the world to wanna say, I got SEO figured out. I can sprinkle some paid media on stuff, and I can get Instagram influencers, and I could sell out of everything. You can have that desire, but if your buyer isn't on those channels, it doesn't matter. So that becomes really the deciding factor. And it's not so much a one versus the other, but it's how do you get them to work together? Alignment is key. You can have digital channels generating interest or revenue, but then also people, salespeople, that are using those channels. This is the whole idea of understanding leads and how leads come in, how they get generated, how they get scored, qualified, moved, and things like this. This is the whole alignment. So while the answer is relatively easy and it's really asking the question of where's your buyer? And your buyer may be in multiple channels. Your buyer may be at a trade show. Your buyer may be online. Your buyer may be at a school or an organization or an event. Figure out where your buyer is and go meet them in those places. And this is the whole omni-channel approach. Omni-channel is a term that's kind of been coined over the past 15, 20 years or so, generally in the customer service world, but it's trying to be channel agnostic. So in call center, it's phone, email, chat, social. That's omni-channel, is you can get a hold of my company in any channel that works for you. The same is true when trying to market and sell. So the question you asked about when do you bring in a salesperson? And I would say it's probably not the right question to ask. Think about where are your buyers and how do you engage with your buyers? LinkedIn, are your buyers on LinkedIn? Then it's probably worth having somebody use that channel to go find your buyers. Are your buyers on Facebook? Go onto Facebook. So there's different ways that you can meet your buyer. I don't know if that kind of answers it, but it's a constant focus on
perfectly, because you see, it even broadens my perspective on Entrepreneurs Brew because it's where your buyer is. So if I want to go one-on-one, then maybe the channel is the website and I really need to focus on that experience. But let's say we want to become the preferred coffee of co-working spaces.
Okay.
Right? Co-working spaces may necessitate a more in-person sales experience. Now we're doing coffee tastings. It needs to be somebody who understands.
You're going to use events. Absolutely.
Correct. So and that's another channel. So I get it. It's not the product that really should be dictating your strategy. Is again a focus on the buyer. We're gonna dig into this buyer cycle a little bit more, but I gotta go collect some revenue. All right, Ed. So hang on. We're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back. Hang in there with us. This is the 614 Startups podcast. Support for 614 Startups comes from the law firm of Dickinson Wright, with around 500 attorneys working from 19 offices across the U.S. and Canada. They handle all types of business transactional law, including advising privately held and venture capital-backed companies in capital raising, mergers and acquisition, and transactions involving technology, software, data, and e-commerce. Partner Alex Brown serves as outside counsel to startup companies ranging from business entity selection and formation, protection and commercialization of technology assets, conducting business online, and data security issues. For more information, visit dickinsonwright.com. Support for 614 Startups comes from Hairdrop. Never visit the beauty supply store again. Order your beauty products from the Hairdrop app and have them delivered in an hour or less. Hairdrop is like DoorDash for beauty products. Get your hair care, grooming tools, hair extensions, and more when you need them to ensure you look and feel your best at all times. Available for download from both the Apple and Google Play stores. Get a beauty supply store in your pocket by visiting hairdrop.app and have your beauty delivered today. Welcome back to the 614 Startups Podcast. I'm continuing my conversation with Ed Porter of Chip CRO. Ed, I want to pick up right where we left off because, this is really giving me a lot of value, a lot of things to think about when it comes to my business. So let's say I'm a salesperson. Usually in a startup, that's going to be the founder or one of the founders going out and pounding the pavement. A lot of times we're pitching pretty hard, right? We want to get that customer to buy, and we want them to buy right now. But the customer, again, thinking about the customer's process, I want to dig into the customer's buying process when you have a salesperson in front of them. What does that look like?
So this is mapped out in a lot of micro steps. And you hear the term sales process, and a lot of times people will think about stages in your CRM. You have introduction and qualification and so on and so forth. And those are all fine, but we want to think about how the buyer buys. So I believe that sales is a journey, and that journey is dictated by you meeting the buyer at an intersection of stuff that they care about versus stuff that you have that can help them. So there was a YouTube video I saw that it basically, if you go to YouTube and just search like salesperson word vomit or something to that degree, you'll come up with this video, but it talks about a guy who's walking into a prospect's office and he just unloads the whole time. He's talking the whole time, making jokes and being corny, and then ultimately he leaves the room. And it happened to be it was some guy, it was an IT guy trying to fix that customer's computer. So it's a great realization of you can have your own agenda and want to have all of these discussions, but if you're not resonating with the person, then it doesn't matter. So that's where these micro goals are important.
But that takes a lot of self-awareness though.
I would say, I don't know if it takes as much self-awareness as much as it does awareness of again, who you're trying to talk to.
But don't you think, all right, let's take it out of business. I think a lot of times, and maybe I'm just bad at this, it's good that I'm married, but a lot of times the dude on a date talks way too much, right? It's just like you feel like you need to talk. I feel like if that applies to dating, there must be some kind of underlying biological reason why somebody would walk in and just feel like they have to word vomit. I think that feels more natural when you're like on the spot than it is to like be quiet and ask questions. That
Right.
slowing down process, I feel, is a little bit more a skill than something that most people do naturally. What is your take on that?
So earlier this year, I recorded a podcast. It's called Inside Sales, and it's all about sales stuff. And I talk about this, and I talk about word vomiting. This is exactly what happens because as a salesperson, you're used to striking out a ton. So as the dating scene, at some point if you're one half of the date, you're either striking out a lot, or the other half, you're going on a lot of dates and it's just, they're not fun. So at some point, there's a decent amount of probability that's going to end in a negative outcome. So baseball's a great example. The best Hall of Famers barely have or just over a 300 batting average. That means 7 out of 10 times they're at the plate, they're striking out. So it's a negative outcome. So that's one thing that's frustrating. So that weighs on everybody's mind. So when you have a conversation with somebody where you get something that resonates, you want to pounce. And that pounce takes over, that passion takes over, and that's when you start dominating an event, a conversation, a date. So it's those moments of excitement where somebody resonates with something that gets in our brains, and that's when we go maniacal and word vomit.
Yeah, but you could also, in the word vomiting, get into an issue where the person's ready to buy and you never ask them to buy.
Or you, even more so, or you talk them out of buying.
Correct.
Absolutely. So that's the negative. The word vomiting, that's the negative. So how do you fix it? So the problem is talking too much. The solution is going down, everyone says sales is about asking questions. Well, okay, what questions do I ask? So we talk about pain points. So am I going to ask a potential customer, hey, tell me what keeps you up at night? The odds of somebody actually opening up and being honest or thinking that I'm real by saying that is slim to none. So how do I get that same answer but ask it a different way? And that's where these micro goals come into play. So the first thing would be I may find out who Elio is, and I may want to sell him something. So I'm going to try and find a channel, and then I'm going to reach out, phone, email, text, whatever, LinkedIn. So, but my goal isn't to sell you something on an interaction. My goal is to assess interest. I don't care about anything else. All I want to do is try and align something that might be of interest to you. Hey, Elio, you're an awesome podcast host on 614startups.com.
Thank you.
See? So that's my first introduction. Are you gonna keep reading?
Of course.
Probably, because I said something that you're passionate about. So that's my goal. Is on that first line, all I want you to do is to keep reading. So then the next point is, hey, one of the things that I've helped a lot of podcast hosts with is provide unparalleled sound engineering. And I'm happy to share some sound bits if that's of interest, but is this something that you're concerned about with today? That's it, that's all. And it's an interaction that's trying to look at you as a person and make something relevant to you. Talk about an area that I've helped people like you, and then I'm just simply assessing interest. And if there is interest, care to have a conversation. That's my only goal in the outreach. So in a date, again, we can do the same thing in a date.
Now, what would really put me over the top for the sound engineer is like, man, I'm a sound engineer and you're one of the best sounding podcasts I've ever heard. What do you do for your sound engineering? It's not that I want to sell you anything. Again, I get what you're saying. It is this resonance that you need to find with your customer that keeps them moving down the line with you. But my question is, how do you find out where they are on that spectrum? Because if you have all these mini goals, which is like get interest, don't have them hang up on you, you have them engaging in. So how do you know where they are in the buying process through a conversation with them? Is it something that you're regularly checking in with the customer to see, oh, have I moved them to the next first down?
So this is where you talked earlier about the website and how much is too much that you put in. This is where I say you can never invest too much time in figuring this out, because you're trying to look at this from a who's my buyer. So let's say I'm selling to school districts throughout the US, and I'm selling a technology product that allows the students to learn better. I'm just making something up. So I may call a superintendent, and I may not know the superintendent's name. I may not know it's Ed Porter, but I've worked with enough superintendents to have an idea of some of the things that they like or don't like. So I can start to target this to the persona of a superintendent, of a school district, of multiple buildings, and I can start going real deep, and then I can start figuring out what do they care about and how does that resonate with a product or service that I solve. So I may not know who the person is, may know nothing about them, but I'm going to target to the persona of a superintendent and say kind of the same things. Hey, Elio, found your contact information on the school's website. As a superintendent, I'm sure you're pulled in a lot of different directions. Not sure if this is in your wheelhouse today, but we provide this technology that does blah, blah, blah. Does this resonate, or are you interested in having more of a conversation? So I don't need to spend time researching Elio as a superintendent specifically, but I know enough about superintendents because I know enough about the products or services that I'm selling that are solving problems, or I would even say it's not even solving problems. It's also reducing problems or improving efficiencies. It doesn't have to completely solve, it just needs to help. So you can enable these things. I know enough about what I'm doing, and that's where I would tell teams, and I do this today, is to tell CEOs and to really look at this buying process of what are you trying to sell, but more so what are you trying to solve or eliminate or reduce or improve. Come up with those words and then spend time engineering that. Start spending time figuring out who your buyer is, what do they care about. And that first outreach, I may not get a response. Well, that's a pretty clear indicator that that problem isn't something they're struggling with. So what do? Maybe I wait a week, maybe 2 weeks, and I come up with another problem altogether to say, here's another area of superintendent, again, technology that I'm trying to sell. Hey, Elio, again, I know that as a superintendent, you're pulled in a lot of different directions, probably figuring out where the next budget dollar is going to come from. And then I'm trying to make it up, so it's a little tough on the
But is
spot,
this where the science of selling comes in, which is you have a theory of what your milestones are, and then you engage the market. Classic Mike Tyson, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yes.
So you're getting punched in your face left and right, right? People aren't calling you back. People are like blocking you, right? Your message is not necessarily resonating. There's no perfect way to go about this. You really go about it in via an iterative process, right? So you, as the founder, you're usually the guinea pig. And that's why it's kind of important to document these things, failures, successes, and create a real sales process. Do you find that in a lot of the companies that you engage with, that founders have taken the time, and when they hire that sales person or the director of sales, are they handing off a manual that has this workflow kind of written out, or are you finding like, oh my God, they're just still winging it? What are you seeing when you work with people?
That's exact. So the clients that I work with, they maybe have done some things around it, but they haven't. That's exactly what I do, is I go in having very basic discussions, and I ask the founder or even the team to say, tell me about your product. And if they start telling me features and benefits, then they haven't mapped this out. Then if you're telling me about your product and you say, we help a lot of school teachers better manage the types of technology that their students are using so that they can't, like if you're telling me like I'm a buyer, if you're speaking to me, that means you're trained properly. And so when you go into this to say, how do we architect this? That's the mentality of how do we engineer what those things are? How do I put on paper in a playbook, and how do I start from scratch of who can buy our product? Let's map out the buyers. Are there industries? Are there different titles? Can we sell our product to a CFO, to a CEO, to a CHRO? Map out all of these people, and it doesn't have to be autonomous either. It can be, there may be 8 people involved in a buying decision. If you're selling $1 million solution, you're generally getting up into the 7-8 people in a buying committee. So understanding all of those people, the industries you're serving, and then you go down to, what does a CFO care about in the buying committee? Well, they care about money. Okay, well, what about money do they care about? Is it on-time invoicing? Is it quick turnaround? Like, what do they care about? And you build that out. Now we're getting down to specifics to say, I have got a product that solves a problem, but if I'm going to sell just to the superintendent, I'm losing, because I got to go, they probably have to take it to the board. So what does the board care about? The board cares about keeping the lights on and keeping themselves out of the news, unless it's for good things. So how do I create message that's going to help the superintendent sell the board on giving them the approval to buy my product? If it's the superintendent, maybe the superintendent has a specialty teacher that needs more help. So how does my product help a special ed teacher? So I got to go all of these levels of these buyers, and if I don't have enough insight as a salesperson to be able to appeal to each of them, that's where the opportunity lies.
And that's the difficulty, because there is a science to selling. And what's your experience?
I would argue sales is all science, and that is for another topic, and I will gladly debate anybody that says art and science. I've recently been sold that I believe it's all science.
All right, and another thing that we're going to shelve is Engineers have the mindset but hate selling. And salespeople love selling, but they don't always have the mindset to kind of put a workflow or actually document the process. But that's, again, like you said, a podcast for another time. I want to skip over to customer success. So let's say you go through the process, you map it out, and the person becomes a customer. What is customer success actually?
Okay, so this is another area I'm extremely passionate about, because if any customer success, customer experience, whatever you want to call them, the sale, the renewal of that product or service starts at the onboarding. And if you mess up onboarding, you've increased the probability that the repeat purchase won't happen. Mm-hmm. So when you look at this, it's a relay race, and you have 4 people on a team running, and you're passing the baton, right? Well, every person in that relay race has specific goals. So maybe the first one, and I don't know this, but I'm guessing, the first one, maybe it's sprint, just go as hard as you can. Number 2 is the pacer. Number 3 is the pacer, and number 4 is the sprinter. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to sprint if I'm in number 2 position. All I'm trying to do is help give my next partner the best, and that's the baton pass. Mm-hmm. So that same thing is true with sales, that baton gets passed to customer success in order to onboard them. And that person or team needs to understand, what were those reasons why they bought? What happened in the whole sales process? What did you learn from them? What did they say? Are there problems that illuminated that you said we could solve? I need to know that. And then I'm going to set you up from the beginning to make sure we're going to get you up, we're going to get you training, and more importantly, we're going to show you how to solve these problems that you told us were problems. Building the best case for an onboarding program is the start of customer success. Beyond that, everything there is adoption, usage, effectiveness, and that, I would argue, is a harder sales process than the salesperson who sells the deal. Mm-hmm. Because as you use a product or service, and this, again, I'm going to use your coffee about. So as I buy a product, there are things that have to happen. I may like the experience, got the product on time, tastes pretty good. Well, then what? When am I going to buy again? And that's going to be contingent on how often I drink coffee, mm-hmm. how often I'm drinking your coffee. So I could rebuy in 2 weeks, or it could take me 6 months. So how do you know how to engage with that buyer from your marketing campaigns and following up? It's the same thing with customer success. Is I need to make sure that I'm onboarding you properly, that we're training you to use our product that's going to solve these problems. And then at some point in the future, I need to know, are those problems being solved? Did we deliver on what we said we were going to? Are there other problems that are being illuminated that we didn't know about? If I don't have those check-ins, guess what happens at renewal? At some point, a lead trigger or some kind of email or task gets created, mm-hmm. where I reach out to the customer, hey, how's everything going? Oh, it's complete crap. It's not really working, and yeah, by the way, we're going to cancel in 3 months. Mm-hmm. You don't ever want to be shocked. So how do you stage it better so that you're engaged with the buyer, you understand how they're using your product or service, and then ultimately those are going to give you the buying signals to help the repeat sale. How do you get the repeat sale? If you're bringing in tons of customers and they're all churning, you don't got a great business.
So to me, taking a big business that a lot of people are going to be familiar with, like Netflix, right? The promise of value is never be bored. Never be bored, right? And so Netflix has to make sure you're never bored. Every time I go to Netflix, it's almost like a social media. I'm like, how are they producing all this content? That is their customer success story.
Yeah.
Where every evening you're not bored. The day Netflix misses on that is the day that they sacrifice potentially my next renewal, right? I think that's keeping that promise to the customer, right? The other thing in that I think we're experimenting with and we're seeing a move to with companies is creating customer communities, right? So how can we create a coffee community where it's not necessarily, hey, you just isolated Ed drinking Entrepreneur's Brew, but it's you part of the Entrepreneur's Brew drinker club, where it's like you talking about your coffee experience with other people. So the core of my engagement with you is not just from the company, right? You're being reinforced by this community. Just like Nike, it's like sneakerheads Nike doesn't even have to do that anymore. They have their own subculture, and they talk about the product, and they love the product, and they're engaging with the product. That's a customer success story. How are you thinking about your customers creating customer communities as well?
So this is a whole other strategy of community-led growth. So there's sales-led growth, there's product-led growth, which kind of started hit the surface 7-8 years ago or so, and now community-led. And on the B2B, you have B2B and B2C, and I think there's a little bit of difference because there's a couple B2C examples you've given, but ultimately, community-led growth is a strategy that's starting to pop up. And I'm gonna date myself a little bit here, but back in the days of internet, of dial-up, there was IRC was the tool. That was the big tool. And really that, I feel like, without being quoted, I feel like that was the first user chat experience. So people could come into chat rooms, you can create your own chat rooms, you can invite some people, and you could start to build some commonalities. Like, here's a chat room about cigars. Here's a chat room about sneakers. And then you get all these people in here exchanging ideas. So that happened a long time ago, and it's interesting how it's surfacing now. So I believe community-led growth strategies can help. I don't know that it's applicable everywhere, and I won't make the proclamation that it is, but you gave an example of Netflix, and where they're at right now, and how they're making a statement of never be bored. So they have to do that. Is them creating a community important? I would say I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Could it be the demise of their brand? Maybe, if they, hindsight's 20/20. So you look at these other brands of how do you create these communities, and on the B2B world, there's a lot of these communities that are coming up. I mean, the pandemic raced everybody to Slack, and Slack just became used. And then you started seeing these communities form on Slack channels, and then channels are created, and I'm getting to engage with people across the world talking about things that I like. And whether that was sponsored by a brand or not is secondary, but it's creating avenue and access. It's no different than Googling, really. I can Google something and find some answers, or I can go into a community and find some answers. So I may be going a little bit on a soapbox here, but the interesting part about community-led growth is that what's the value that each person gives and gets? Because it can't be one way. If it is, that's just weakens the community. I've done this a few times. I've been part of networking groups. I run a local sales networking group here in town for the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals. And I like to talk about everything that we can do for people, but more importantly, I ask them about, what kind of professional development have you done on yourself? Have you looked online? Have you looked at research? And it's not a prerequisite, but it's me trying to understand, what do you want out of a community? Do you just want to come and learn? And if so, that's great. Do you want to learn and contribute? Do you just want to contribute? Helping to understand what the user wants is extremely important. When you connect those users that are sharing ideas and hopefully having similarities or highly debated opinions, which is fine too, there's absolutely a need for a product or service sale there somewhere, because at some point people are going to be talking about terrible product experiences that they had or wonderful experiences that they had.
All right, Ed, well, I'm going to take one more break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a new project that you're working on. That is right up my alley, because I love the world of healthcare, and I can talk about it all day. So, folks, we'll be right back. We'll take one final break, and we'll wrap up with Ed Porter of Chip CRO. Support for the 614 Startups podcast comes from Nationwide. Nationwide's mission is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. To help fulfill that mission, Nationwide is looking to invest its $350 million venture capital investment fund in InsurTechs that will help them create new and exciting products and solutions to meet the needs of their customers. If you're interested in partnering with Nationwide's venture capital team, visit nationwideventures.com to learn more. Again, the website is nationwideventures.com. Nationwide is on your side. All right, guys, let's all be honest with ourselves. How many times have you needed to get an oil change, clean your car, or get a tire rotation, and you've put it off for weeks on end? We're all guilty of it. My friends over at Vaunt set out to make delayed car care a thing of the past and created the most convenient and affordable way to care for your car. All you have to do is, 1, book your service and desired pickup location. 2, drop your keys with a certified Vaunt driver who picks up your car for you. And 3, your car will be serviced and delivered back to you within 3 hours. From now on, the only thing you have to worry about is where you're going and who you're going with. Look, guys, I'm telling you, this is the future. Try out Vaunt, VOHNT.com, and use promo code 614startups for 20% off. 614 Startups Nation, we're back for our final segment with Ed Porter, my guest, and we're going to pivot to talking about a new project that Ed is working on, HCRpath. So what is HCRpath?
It is a splash into a big pond to try and help improve the preventative care process that is starting to evolve in not only this country but in the world. So we are digitizing in its simplest form, digitizing the annual wellness visit and trying to make that more accessible and usable to patient care providers, whether that's assisted living facilities, primary care physicians, any nurse practitioner. We're trying to arm them with the easiest way to help them survey their patients and then use that data to start helping and shedding light on whether these outcomes are getting better or getting worse.
All right, now as an industry, annual wellness visits, no matter how young or how old you are, we know are critical, right? To just have as part of your self-care routine. What did you see as an issue, right, or a problem where this annual wellness visit needed to be digitized? What are we doing now versus what HCRpath offers?
So this started, the founder who brought myself and another person in as well, she started this as a opportunity to improve hearing. And it was not so much improve hearing as much as it was to understand how hearing loss can be a symptom for other comorbidities. So it started there and it's really morphed into this. So the importance of the annual wellness visit is, like you said, it's like a physical, right? It's for anyone that's not on Medicare, it's a physical. And then for people on Medicare, they just term it differently, as you know. So how this came about was just trying to really understand reasons why, and it's peeling back these layers. And healthcare is just a giant problem. I would say there's lots of goods too, but there's a lot to unpack here. So when you go, what we're trying to figure out here is when Medicare started these incentives during Obamacare on trying to incent providers to take more action on preventative care, that was the start. I think everybody will agree it's certainly not where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And that was a start, to give them incentives to do these. So the value of that is it's just like any other, think about a customer satisfaction survey. Why do businesses send customer satisfaction surveys? Easy, because they want to know how they're doing. Perfect. It's exactly why these surveys exist. You want to know how the patient, the doctor needs to know what to do to help them treat them. And it's not just about calling your doctor when you're sick. Those are one avenues of health, but then the other is what's happening when you're not having these ailments. And that, I don't believe, gets enough light. I think I saw data that said 37% of Medicare patients are getting these surveys. 37%, and that's people who are on Medicare. And that's, it's a little bit illuminating to say, if we can even increase that to 50%, what does that do? So that's really where it started, was just trying to understand this idea of how do you delay onset of any kind of health issue when you're older, knowing that the elderly population is more susceptible to all of these. So how do you try and get people to stay at home longer, live on their own longer? And it's less about the knowledge, because I think at some point everyone knows, myself included, if I want to lose weight, I know what I got to do. I got to eat better and I got to exercise. But when you get older, it's that you have the knowledge, but then there's a lot of things that become unknown of how does hearing loss impact another comorbidity? A lot of that is probably unknown. So that's what we're trying to illuminate, is bring these ties and not only digitize the survey, but create a summary. And that summary can be analyzed time and time again to understand, are things going well or things not going well? Does the provider need to recommend another course of treatment? Or do they need to have the hard conversation that says, if you don't stop drinking 7 scotches a day, your life is going to be minimized by X. And how do we bring in data and aggregated stuff? So that's the idea of what we're trying to do. Is we've got a big vision and a big, hairy, audacious goal. We're just starting out, and I hope that we can get there.
All right, Ed. Well, thank you so much for shedding a little bit of light on HCRpath. If you thought I interrupted you a lot this episode, when you come back or when your co-founder comes back to talk about HCRpath, I'm going to have a lot of interruptions for that person, because I live and breathe healthcare, but specifically senior healthcare, and really what we do to drive, to improve outcomes and to drive down the cost curve. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Folks, thank you for joining me on another episode. I got to give you my one takeaway, and here it is. You need to have the sales mindset, but you also need to adopt the engineering mindset. There's a process to this, and sales is a science. So get your science on. Until next time, peace.